sleigh. The International Space Station glided silently above the curve of the Earth. From below, the planet's oceans shimmered under the sun, unaware of the drama slowly unfolding above them. Inside the ISS-6, astronauts moved in a coordinated dance, weightless and precise. Commander Martha Vasquez floated toward the lab module. She adjusted the controls of a microscopic experiment, monitoring the growth of bacteria in a nutrient solution. Every motion was careful. In zero gravity, even the smallest misstep could send equipment tumbling into fragile circuits. "Morning, Martha," said Lieutenant Kenji Sato, the mission's engineer, from across the module. He twisted a panel open, checking the oxygen filtration system. "Atmosphere readings are normal. No issues detected." "Good," Martha replied. She allowed herself a small smile. "I want a full check today. Last week's solar flare disrupted minor systems. I don't want any surprises." The other crew members, biologist Dr. Amina Patel, physicist Alexei Morozov, medical officer Lisa Chun, and communications officer Rajiv Nair were scattered throughout the station. Each was engrossed in their tasks, unaware that a threat approached them faster than they could imagine. Suddenly, a series of urgent beeps shattered the quiet hum of the station. Red lights flashed across the control panels, casting an ominous glow on their faces. Rajiv's voice crackled through the intercom. "Commander, we have an unscheduled object on approach. Collision course." Martha's stomach tightened. "Identify it, Rajiv." "Now." "Trying. Commander, it's small, metallic, and it's not broadcasting any transponder signal. It's moving too fast to be orbital debris." Alexei floated over to the main viewport, his eyes wide. "It looks like a probe. But not one of ours. Not Russian, not European." On the screen, a grainy image appeared, a sleek, angular object, unlike any man-made satellite. It pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. "Martha," commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Fire the thrusters. Get us out of its path." "Thrusters not responding. Commander!" Kenji yelled back, his fingers flying across the console. Panic began to creep into the module. Dr. Amina Patel, who had been studying plant growth, now stared at the approaching object, her breath held tight. "What is that thing?" she whispered. The object closed the distance with terrifying speed. With a sickening crunch, it impacted the station's hull. The entire structure shuddered violently, throwing the crew against the walls. "An airlock is failing. Seal it off," Martha ordered, pushing herself toward the emergency controls. "Everyone, get to the Soyuz capsules. Prepare for immediate evacuation." The crew scrambled, a frantic ballet of survival. Lisa Chun grabbed the emergency medical kits, while Alexei and Amina moved to secure their research data. But as they moved toward the escape pods, a new sound echoed through the station, a low, resonant hum, unlike any mechanical noise they had ever heard. It seemed to come from the point of impact. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the strobing red of the emergency lights. "What's happening?" Rajiv's voice was shaky. "Power is fluctuating all over the station." Then, from the breached module, a soft, ethereal blue light began to seep into the corridor. It wasn't the harsh light of an electrical fire, but something different. Martha froze. Evacuation was the protocol, but her instincts screamed that this was no ordinary accident. "Hold your positions," she said, her voice low. "Alexei, get a reading on that energy signature." Alexei, fumbling with a handheld scanner in the dark, aimed it toward the light. "The readings are off the charts, Commander. It's not radiation. It's something else entirely. A form of energy I've never seen." Through the blue light pulsed, and with each pulse, the station's systems flickered back to life. then died again. It's trying to communicate, Amina whispered, her biologist's curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. The pulses. They're not random. It's a pattern. Suddenly, the internal hatch to the Columbus module, which Kenji had been trying to seal, slid open with a smooth hiss. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the blinding blue light, was a figure. It was tall and slender, its limbs long and graceful. It wasn't human. The crew stared, frozen in a mixture of terror and awe. The being took a step into the corridor, its movements fluid and silent in the zero-gravity environment. It raised a three-fingered hand, not in a gesture of aggression, but of greeting. It was calm, ancient, and filled with a sense of profound curiosity. Do not be afraid. It resonated. We did not intend to cause harm. We have traveled far. We are explorers, like you. Her mind racing to process the impossible reality before her. The whole breach, the system failures. It was all an accident. An interstellar fender bender. Who? What are you? She finally managed to ask, her own voice sounding foreign in her ears. The being's form shimmered. We are the Signian. We have watched your world for a long time. From a distance. We saw your light, your signals reaching out into the void. We came to see who was calling. Kenji slowly lowered the wrench he had been gripping like a weapon. You crashed into us. A sense of embarrassment seemed to emanate from the alien. Our navigational systems are not calibrated for such cluttered orbits. Your space is filled with many small things. We miscalculated. The Signian gestured toward the damaged hull, and the station's main lights flickered back on, steady and bright. Repairs are complete, the voice in their minds said. We apologize for the intrusion and the distress we have caused. The crew looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and wonder. The greatest threat they had ever faced had turned into the most monumental discovery in human history. Lexi, the physicist, floated forward, a wide grin spreading across his face. You can manipulate matter. Your energy source. It's incredible. Can you teach us? The Signians seemed to chuckle, a warm feeling that spread through their minds. Patience. There is much to share, but first, we were told it is customary to exchange gifts. The being held up its hand, and a small, crystalline orb materialized in its palm. It glowed with an inner light. Outside the International Space Station, a small cargo spacecraft drifted its path, almost invisible to the station's sensors. The ship's modifications were subtle, blending into the endless black of space. Inside its cramped hull, a team of 5 operatives watched the ISS through specialized monitors. Their faces were grim, illuminated only by the dim, flickering lights of their equipment. Target in position, said Victor, the leader. His voice was calm, cold, and carried the weight of years of experience. Have a narrow window before Earth-based tracking picks up any anomalies. Proceed on my mark. He exuded a chilling confidence that left no room for error. Each member of his team knew their role, their movements practiced to perfection. Back on the station, life continued in its familiar rhythm. Martha and her team floated through the modules, their day filled with the quiet hum of machinery and the gentle clinking of tools. These astronauts were the best of the best, trained rigorously for every conceivable emergency from fires to depressurization. But nothing in their extensive training could have prepared them for the danger that was now silently closing in. At the communications console, Rajiv frowned. A brief flicker of static had just danced across his monitor, tapped a few buttons, trying to clear the interference. Minor interference, he muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. Probably just some solar activity. Nothing to worry about. He dismissed it, turning his attention back to his other tasks. It was a small, seemingly insignificant event, but it was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Victor and his team were already in motion. Their small craft maneuvered with breathtaking precision, approaching the ISS's exterior. They deployed magnetic grapples, their metallic claws locking onto the station's hull with a quiet, satisfying thud. Even the smallest miscalculation, the slightest unexpected vibration, could trigger an alarm and alert the crew inside. Hours of preparation, countless simulations, and sophisticated hacking had all led to this single, critical moment. The fate of the mission and the lives of everyone on board the station hung in the balance. Inside the ISS, the crew moved from module to module, blissfully unaware of the invisible threat that now clung to their home. Amina drifted towards the observation deck, the famous cupola, and gazed down at the breathtaking vista of Earth below. "Space feels so peaceful," she said softly, almost to herself, her reflection visible in the thick glass. "But sometimes, I wonder just how fragile this all is." The station, and marvel of human ingenuity, felt like a tiny, delicate bubble in the vast, unforgiving void. Martha, who had floated up beside her, met her gaze. She offered a reassuring smile. "Fragile? Maybe," she conceded. "Pose. But that's why we train so hard. That's why we're here to make sure that even the fragile things can survive." Her words were meant to be comforting, a testament to their preparedness and resilience. But at that very moment, a tiny shadow passed across the station's massive solar panels, a fleeting darkness that went completely unnoticed. On the exterior of the station, Victor's team clung to the hull like spiders on a web. They adjusted their magnetic grips, moving silently and methodically towards their target, a secondary airlock. They were preparing to breach the station's defenses. The ISS's external sensors, which should have been screaming alerts, had been expertly tampered with. They were blind and deaf to the intrusion. No alarm would sound. No warning would be given. The wolves were at the door, and the shepherds had no idea they were even there. Victor signaled to his team. Phase 2. Begin entry sequence. One of his operatives, a woman named Lena, produced a compact plasma cutter. She aimed the device at the airlock's hinge mechanism. The plan wasn't a brute force entry, it was surgical. They would disable the lock from the outside, overriding its internal controls. Inside, the crew continued their day, oblivious. Rajiv, still feeling a slight unease from the earlier static, decided to run a deeper diagnostic on the communications array. "Hey, Martha," he called out over the internal comms. "I'm seeing some weird energy fluctuations around the comms antenna. It's probably nothing, but I'm going to run a full sweep just to be safe." Hey, Martha's voice came back, calm and professional. If Rajiv felt something was off, it was worth investigating. But there was no urgency in her tone, no hint of alarm. It was just another small anomaly in the complex environment of space. She placed it over the airlock's manual override port. A series of lights blinked on the device as it began to interface with the station's systems. This was the most delicate part of the operation. They were not just opening a door. They were tricking the station's master computer into thinking the airlock was being opened from the inside as part of a routine maintenance check. Victor watched the progress on his wrist-mounted display. The airlock's internal pressure indicators remained stable. The life support systems showed no change. The crew's biometric data, which they had also hacked into, showed normal heart rates and activity levels. They were ghosts, completely unseen and unheard. A green light finally flashed on Lena's device. She gave Victor a thumbs up. He nodded in return. With a soft, almost inaudible hiss, the outer hatch of the airlock began to swing open. The void of space beckoned. One by one, the operatives slipped inside the small chamber, their movements economical and fluid. Once they were all in, the outer door closed, sealing them inside. Air from the station began to slowly fill the tiny chamber. It was a noisy process, but the airlock was located in a storage section of the station, far from the main living and working quarters. The sound would be masked by the station's own ambient noise. Back at the communications console, Rajiv's diagnostic finished. The results were puzzling. "Martha, this is strange," he reported. "The diagnostic shows a massive, localized energy spike right near the Z1 truss. But it lasted for less than a second and then vanished. It doesn't look like any solar flare I've ever seen. And now, I'm getting a faint pressure alert from the Piers airlock." Martha's attention was now fully captured. "No, not a leak," Rajiv replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. It looks like it's being repressurized." Toll feeling began to spread through Martha's chest. An unscheduled repressurization cycle. That shouldn't be possible without a manual command from inside the station. "Who's near Piers?" she asked, her voice now sharp with a sudden urgency. "No one," replied another crew member. "We're all in the main modules." Suddenly, the pieces clicked together in Martha's mind. The comms interference, the energy spike, the unscheduled airlock cycle. It wasn't an equipment malfunction. It was a deliberate act. "Rajiv," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "Lock down the station. Now, seal all internal hatches. I don't know what's happening, but we are not alone." The inner hatch, now under their control, slid open, revealing the corridor of the space station. Victor and his team stepped out, their boots clamping onto the floor magnets. They were armed, silent, and now they were inside. The hunt had begun. The fragile piece of the International Space Station had just been shattered, and a new, terrifying chapter was about to unfold, miles above the unsuspecting world below. What do they want? And how will the crew fight back against a threat they never saw coming? If you're as captivated as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The blackness of space seemed eternal, stretching out beyond all comprehension, broken only by the soft, beautiful glow of Earth below. To anyone observing from afar, the International Space Station appeared utterly sereno, shining monument to human ingenuity and our spirit of cooperation. It hung there, a beacon of peace in the silent void. But within that quiet, unseen and unheard, a terrible danger lurked. The routine, the peace that the crew knew it was all about to be shattered. Inside, the crew continued their work, completely oblivious. Kenji floated past the lab module, carrying a toolkit. "Hey, Martha, I'm noticing a minor glitch in the comms line. Should I go check it out?" he asked, his voice calm. "Not yet," she replied, her attention fixed on the delicate bacterial experiment she was running. "Just keep monitoring it for now. We'll check the whole system after lunch." It was just another day in orbit, another set of tasks to complete. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. But outside, in the unforgiving vacuum, something was terribly wrong. Victor moved with silent purpose along the station's exterior. He activated a small device he'd placed on the airlock. It clicked softly, a sound instantly swallowed by the vast emptiness of space. Inside, no one heard a thing, but that tiny click was the sound of their worlds breaking apart. The locking mechanism disengaged, creating an opening for intrusion. A breach. The station's defenses were down. Victor and his highly specialized team moved with fluid, practiced precision. They were like ghosts gliding along the ISS's hull. Each operative was a master of their craft. Some were experts at hacking complex systems, already working to blind the station's digital eyes and ears. Others were trained for the brutal reality of zero-gravity combat, their bodies conditioned for a fight unlike any on Earth. And one. Their pilot was a genius at intercepting orbital crafts with surgical accuracy, ensuring no one could escape and no one could interfere. Their cargo spacecraft, a dark and menacing silhouette, drifted just beyond the ISS's sensor range, a predator waiting patiently, completely invisible to the crew inside. Status. Victor's voice crackled through their encrypted comms channel, sharp and clear. "Are we ready?" Tree. The response came back instantly from his tech specialist. "Systems are green. We have a partial breach in their internal network. Firewalls are degrading. Another 5 minutes and we'll own their entire comms array." Victor acknowledged with a slight nod. "Combat team, on my mark. Remember the objective. We need the data intact. The crew is secondary. No unnecessary casualties, but do not hesitate if they resist." Back inside, Kenji was still feeling uneasy about the comms glitch. It was small, sure, but things on the ISS weren't supposed to have even small glitches without a known reason. He floated over to another console, pulling up the station's external sensor logs. He just had a feeling. His fingers danced across the screen, sifting through terabytes of data. MOSI routine, telemetry, solar radiation levels, micrometeoroid impacts, ... standard stuff. But then, he saw it. A flicker. A ghost in the data stream. A sensor on the outer hull had registered a minuscule pressure change right near the primary airlock. It was so small, the automated system had dismissed it as a calibration error, but Kenji knew the systems. They didn't make errors like that. His heart began to pound against his ribs. "Martha," he said, his voice a little tighter this time. "I think you need to see this." But before she could even respond, the lights in the station flickered violently and then went out, plunging them into an emergency red-lit darkness. Alarms blared to life, a cacophony of urgent, piercing warnings that screamed of catastrophic failure. The station's AI voice, usually so calm, began rattling off a list of system failures. Life support integrity compromised. External communications offline. Navigation systems unresponsive. It was a nightmare scenario. "What's happening?" Martha cried out, grabbing onto a handle to steady herself as the station shuddered. Outside, Victor's team had made their move. The airlock door hissed open. They poured inside, armed and clad in black tactical suits, their faces obscured by reflective visors. They moved with an eerie silence, their mag boots clamping them to the station's corridors. They were a virus, spreading through the station's arteries. Their objective clear? The first crew member they encountered was in the storage module, organizing supplies. He looked up, his eyes widening in pure terror and disbelief. You didn't even have time to scream before one of Victor's team incapacitated him with a non-lethal energy weapon. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. The intruders continued their silent, efficient advance toward the command center. Kenji and Martha were trapped in the lab. "Seal the hatch." "Now," Kenji yelled, scrambling for the manual controls. There, the heavy door began to slide shut just as the first operative appeared in the corridor. A bright flash of energy sizzled past Kenji's head, scoring a black mark on the wall behind him. The door locked with a heavy thud, sealing them inside. But for how long? They could hear the muffled sounds of the intruders trying to force it open. "Dear, inside the station," Martha whispered, her face pale with shock. "How is this possible? Who are they?" Kenji's mind was racing. They were cut off, blind, and hunted. Their home, their sanctuary, had become a death trap. He looked around the lab, his eyes darting from one piece of equipment to another. They had no weapons. They were scientists, not soldiers. But this was their station. Hall. He wasn't going to let it fall without a fight. He grabbed a heavy-duty wrench from his toolkit. "They want something," he said, his voice low and determined. They boarded the ISS for a reason. We need to find out what, and we need to stop them. Martha nodded, her fear slowly being replaced by a steely resolve. They looked at each other in the dim, red emergency light. Their peaceful mission of discovery had just turned into a desperate battle for survival. 250 miles above the Earth. They were alone, surrounded, and their only hope was their own courage and ingenuity against a foe who had planned every single move. The silent war for the International Space Station had begun. All clear. Entry point, ready? Nadia's voice crackled through the comms, her words sharp and precise. No cameras online, no alarms. We have 5 minutes before Earth could detect anomalies. 5 minutes. That's all the time they had. 5 minutes to slip inside the International Space Station, a tiny window that could slam shut in an instant. Victor's team had drilled for this mission 1,000 times, running through every possible scenario, planning for every countermeasure. But this wasn't a simulation. This was live, zero gravity, with the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space just a thin sheet of metal away. The stakes had never been higher. Inside the station, life continued its orbital rhythm. Lisa, one of the astronauts, floated gracefully towards the medical module. Her movements fluid as she began checking supplies. In the command center, Rajiv kept a watchful eye on communications, his gaze occasionally drifting to the mesmerizing blue and white marble of Earth spinning slowly below. A profound calm, the kind that only comes from being suspended between worlds, filled the station. It was a peace that was about to be shattered. In another section, Kenji, the station's engineer, tapped a control panel, his brow furrowed in concentration. Martha, I'm noticing minor pressure fluctuations near the starboard airlock. It could be micrometeoroid impacts. Martha, the station commander, floated over, her own expression mirroring his concern. Monitor it, she instructed. Don't touch anything yet. A strange, cold feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't explain it, but years of experience in the unpredictable void of space had taught her to trust her instincts. And right now, her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This was different. Matt sighed. Completely silent, Nadia positioned herself at the airlock. Tiny, precision thrusters on her suit fired in minute bursts, adjusting her trajectory with the delicacy of a surgeon. Her gloved hand, steady and sure, hovered over the external access panel. A few soft, calculated taps, a barely audible click, and the outer seal disengaged. She then brought a small, specialized tool to the lock. It pulsed, sending a wave of magnetic energy into the mechanism, instantly neutralizing its electronic sensors. The perfect silent entry. Inside the ISS for just a fraction of a second, the station's monitors flickered. A ghost in the machine. Rajiv blinked, rubbing his eyes. Did anyone see that? No, Martha replied, her attention now fully on the console Kenji was watching. Probably just a glitch, he monitoring. But her unease was growing. Outside, Victor gave the signal. Proceed. Keep it quiet. Move fast. One by one, the operatives slipped through the nan-open airlock, their movements a symphony of stealth and training. They moved like shadows, their magnetic boots making soft, rhythmic clicks against the metallic floors as they infiltrated the first module. They were ghosts, unseen and unheard. No alarms blared, no warning lights flashed. Down. The only sign of their intrusion was that faint, nagging whisper of intuition in the minds of the crew, a premonition of the danger that was now inside with them. In the lab module, Amina was deep into an experiment when she felt it a vibration so faint, it was barely perceptible under her fingertips. She paused, her head tilted. Did anyone feel that? Kenji, still focused on his console, shook his head. Probably the station adjusting orbit. It happens all the time. Nothing to worry about. But Martha saw it. She saw the subtle shift in the air pressure readings on her own monitor. It was a fluctuation, but it was too precise, too controlled to be a natural event or a system malfunction. She tapped her console, her fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up the environmental logs. There it was. A tiny spike here, a minuscule drop there. The data painted a chilling picture. Someone or something was actively manipulating the station's systems from the inside. Victor's team moved deeper into the station, their objective clear. They were a single, cohesive unit, each member knowing their role without a word being spoken. The plan was to secure the command module and cut off all communication with Earth. They moved through the connecting tunnels, their dark suits blending into the shadows cast by the complex machinery. The only sound was the constant, low hum of the station's life support systems. Meanwhile, Martha's suspicion had solidified into certainty. She brought up the station schematics, her eyes scanning for any anomaly. The starboard airlock. The pressure fluctuations started there. She cross-referenced it with the internal sensor logs. She saw the minor changes in mass distribution as the team moved through the modules. It was undeniable. "We have intruders," she said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the calm of the command center. Kenji and Rajiv froze, turning to look at her. Intruders?" Kenji asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "How is that possible?" There was no warning, no docking request. "Lock down the command module, now," Martha ordered, her commander's voice taking over. "Seal all bulkheads leading to this section." Rajiv tried to send a scrambled distress signal. "Use the emergency frequency." She knew their 5-minute window was a double-edged sword. If the infiltrators were good enough to get in undetected, they were good enough to anticipate a response. Rajiv's fingers flew across his console. An alarm finally blared, but it wasn't one he had triggered. A new warning flashed on the main screen. External communications array offline. They were too late. The intruders had already cut them off. The hum of the station was now joined by the urgent, piercing sound of the internal security alert. Red lights began to flash, bathing the corridors in an ominous crimson glow. The element of surprise was gone. Victor heard the alarm and knew their quiet approach was over. Phase 2. He commanded over his private comlink. Secure the crew. Non-lethal force only. The mission parameters were strict. No casualties. His team fanned out, moving with renewed urgency. They were no longer ghosts. They were hunters. In the medical bay, Lisa heard the alarm, and her blood ran cold. She immediately sealed the module door and braced herself, grabbing a heavy-duty medical scanner, not much of a weapon, but it was something. She could hear the heavy thud of magnetic boots approaching her position. Nay. Martha watched the internal sensors, tracking the intruders' movements. "They're splitting up," she announced. "They're heading for the lab and the medical bay. Amina, Lisa, lock your doors. Do not engage." She was trying to protect her crew, but she felt a rising sense of helplessness. They were scientists and engineers, not soldiers. They were trapped in a metal can miles above the Earth with a highly trained infiltration squad. A heavy pounding began on the command module's reinforced door. Victor's team had arrived. 2. "Open the door, Commander," a voice said through the door's speaker system. The voice was calm, devoid of any emotion. "We don't want to harm anyone. Cooperate, and this will be over quickly." Martha looked at Kenji and Rajiv. Their faces were pale, a mixture of fear and defiance. She took a deep breath. She was the commander. Her crew was her responsibility. She keyed the intercom. "This is Commander Martha Holly of the International Space Station. You are trespassing in a restricted international zone. Identify yourselves immediately." The only reply was the sound of a high-energy tool beginning to cut through the door. The loud whining screech echoed through the command module, a prelude to the confrontation that was now inevitable. The fragile piece of orbit was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of their new situation. Trapped and isolated, the crew of the ISS could only brace for what was to come. Their fate now in the hands of the silent, efficient strangers who had fallen from the stars. The 5-minute window had closed, and a new, terrifying chapter had just begun. Victor's team fanned out, each operative gliding silently toward their objective. One to communications, another to life support, two more to the navigation systems. They were phantoms in the machine, their movements precise, their goal absolute, total control. For months, they had rehearsed this exact moment, this dark ballet in the void. Below them, within the brightly lit modules, the astronauts were oblivious. They floated through their daily tasks, cataloging experiments, checking systems, completely unaware that shadows were stretching just beyond their line of sight. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed as cosmic quirks. A piece of equipment drifting just a little too far off course. A minor, fleeting glitch in a control panel. A flicker in the lights. These were the tiny ripples that precede a tidal wave. Martha, her instincts honed by years and space, was the first to sense the shift. She broke the comfortable, working silence over the coms. Lisa's voice came back, a hint of concern creeping in. You mean a system fault, like the power fluctuations last week? Martha shook her head, even though no one could see her. I don't know yet, but stay alert. At that very moment, Victor's operatives reached the station's core modules. They worked with practiced efficiency, attaching small, dark devices to the junction boxes. With a soft click, cameras went blind. Communications channels went dead, replaced by a loop of static-filled silence. Their plan unfolded like a silent, dark choreography, a play performed for an audience that couldn't see them. The International Space Station, once a shining beacon of global cooperation, was now quietly, inexorably, falling under siege. Outside, the cargo craft that had delivered this Trojan horse loitered in a blind orbital zone. Its engines cold, a predator waiting in the darkness for any sign of a misstep from its prey. The crew, separated by modules and now by silence, drifted closer to a confrontation they couldn't yet imagine. The calm, the routine, the fragile piece of their orbital helmet was all slipping away, being replaced by a creeping tension, a growing fear of the unknown. And in the profound silence of orbit, where every sound was just an echo in the mind, the first real whispers of danger began to stir. The constant, low hum of the ISS was a sound the crew had grown to love. It was the station's heartbeat, a gentle, mechanical reminder of the bubble of life they inhabited. Floating serenely above the blue and white marble of Earth, but now, beneath that familiar hum, an invisible predator moved. It had slipped through the airlock like a phantom, a shadow spreading through the veins of the station. Victor's voice, a clipped whisper in his team's private comms, broke the silence. Modules secured. Moved to primary access points. His operatives glided through the narrow, cylindrical corridors of the ISS, their magnetic boots clinking softly against the metal walls. Each movement was calculated, economical, a testament to countless hours of training on Earth, in underwater labs and zero-gravity simulations. They converged on the central node, the nexus where the station's vital systems, life support, navigation and communications all came together. It was the heart of the station, and they were there to seize it. Inside the Destiny laboratory, Martha was finishing a routine check on the oxygen filtration system. Kenji floated nearby, his attention absorbed by a diagnostic tablet. It was then that a flicker on a nearby monitor caught Martha's eye. A shadow, a definite shape, moving across a security feed that should have been showing an empty cargo bay. "Kenji, did you see that?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Kenji frowned, glancing up from his tablet. No. Must be a reflection. But Martha's gut, that primal instinct that had saved her more than once, was screaming that this was no glitch. Something was fundamentally wrong. The micropressure sensors she had been monitoring just moments before began to spike erratically. A frantic dance of numbers on her screen. Then she felt a subtle vibration running through the walls of the station, a low thrum that was almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was the feeling of a door being forced, of a lock being broken. Kenji sealed the hatch to this module. Now, she commanded, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the calm. Kenji looked up, surprised by her urgency. Martha, what is it? Tell Lisa and Alex to secure their positions and report. But as Kenji reached for the comm panel, the screen went blank. A single, ominous message appeared in stark red letters, internal network offline. They were cut off, plunging them into the dim, eerie glow of the emergency strips. The life-sustaining hum of the station faltered, replaced by a chilling, unnatural silence. The only sound was their own breathing, suddenly loud and ragged in the confined space. Martha and Kenji exchanged a look of dawning horror. This wasn't a system fault. This wasn't a glitch. This was an intrusion. They weren't alone. The silence was the worst part. An absolute, total quiet that felt heavy, suffocating. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock them. They've cut the power grid, Martha stated, her mind racing, trying to piece together the impossible. They've isolated us, Kenji floated towards the viewport, his face a mask of disbelief as he stared out at the star-dusted blackness. They? Who is they? Before Martha could answer, a loud, metallic bang echoed from the sealed hatch. Then another. And another. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. The rhythmic, heavy thuds were a drumbeat of their impending doom. Kenji backed away from the hatch, his eyes wide with fear. Martha, what do we do? Martha's training kicked in, a cold calm settling over her panic. There was a protocol for depressurization, for fire, for medical emergencies. But there was no protocol for this. They were writing the manual as they went. We need a weapon, she said, her voice steady. Something, anything. Her eyes scanned the lab, filled with complex, delicate scientific equipment. Nothing designed for a fight. Then she saw it, a heavy-duty wrench, magnetically clamped to a maintenance panel. It wasn't much, but it was solid. It was real, sheet. Unclipped the wrench, its weight feeling both unfamiliar and reassuring in her hand. The banging on the hatch grew louder, more frantic. A deep groove began to appear in the metal, the pressure from the other side deforming the reinforced alloy. Kenji, the emergency override for the air scrubber. On my signal, I want you to vent the entire module's atmosphere into the filtration system. It will create a vacuum in here for a few seconds. Kenji stared at her, aghast. But Martha, that will. It could kill us. Too. It will also kill whoever is on the other side of that door, she replied, her gaze fixed on the buckling hatch. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we have. Get ready. The hatch groaned, the locking mechanism screaming in protest. With a final ear-splitting crack, the internal lock failed. The hatch swung inward, and a figure clad in a dark, tactical spacesuit filled the doorway, a weapon raised. The time for strategy was over. The time for survival had begun. Now, Kenji? Martha screamed, lunging forward with the wrench. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A piercing beep shattered the calm of the International Space Station. Rajiv's console flashed red. System override detected in communications. he yelled, his voice cracking with tension. Someone's in the system. Adair. At that exact moment, a shadow detached itself from the darkness at the end of the corridor. A figure cloaked in black, magnetic boots clamping them to the walls, glided silently toward the command module. Martha's heart pounded against her ribs. Lock the modules. Now, she commented, her voice sharp and authoritative. She scrambled across the module, her hands flying over the manual override panels, securing the lab and command sections. The crew scattered, a chaotic but practiced ballet in zero gravity. The intruders, led by a man named Victor, were a well-oiled machine. His team split with chilling efficiency. 2 of his operatives moved towards life support, their movements fluid and menacing. Another veered towards the communications array, while a 4th, Nadia, made a beeline for the navigation controls. Every action was precise, deliberate. A surgical strike aimed at severing the crew's connection to the various systems that kept them alive. They were being cut off, isolated, made prisoners in their own home. The zero-G environment, once a symbol of human achievement, was now a treacherous battleground. Objects floated with a dangerous grace. Tools became potential weapons, but also unpredictable hazards. A stray screwdriver could become a deadly projectile. Martha's eyes darted around, her mind racing. She spotted a heavy wrench drifting lazily past with a practiced motion. She grabbed it, spilling it in her hand to face the approaching intruder. Her training kicked in, but this felt different. This was no simulation. This wasn't a malfunction or a random accident. This was an organized, precise, and deadly attack. A voice boomed through the station's speakers, distorted and metallic. It was Victor. His voice filtered through the hacked communication channel. The station is now under our control. Comply, and no one gets hurt. Martha froze for a split second, 100 training scenarios flashing through her mind. Nenethams, not a single one, had prepared her for the sheer terror of this moment. An armed, organized team had silently boarded the International Space Station, the most secure outpost of humanity. And now, they were dictating terms, holding the crew's lives in their hands. Kenji's eyes, wide with a mix of fear and determination, scanned a secondary control panel. "We can still override life support manually," he said, his voice tight with strain. "But it's risky. One mistake, one wrong flip of a switch, and the oxygen circulation could shut down completely. The entire station would be compromised." The weight of the decision fell on Martha. Protect the station, the billion-dollar marvel of engineering, or protect the people inside it. The choice was instantaneous. "Do it," she said, her voice unwavering. "We have no choice. Protect the crew, not the station. Keep us alive." Her words were a declaration of war. Victor's operatives advanced, confident in their takeover, completely unaware that the crew was already fighting back. The station wasn't just a prize. It was a weapon, and its crew knew every inch of it. They began their countermeasures, a series of small but deliberate actions. Kenji worked frantically at the life support panel. Lisa and Amina started rerouting airlock controls, sealing doors, turning the station's own systems into a maze for the intruders. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse in 3 dimensions. The chaos of zero gravity intensified. Objects collided in the confined space. A floating laptop smacked against a bulkhead, its screen shattering. The wrench Martha had dropped earlier spun past an operative's head, a near miss. A bag of food supplies drifted lazily between the combatants, a surreal obstacle in a life-or-death struggle. Lisa and Amina, moving with the agility of seasoned astronauts, formed an impromptu barrier with their bodies and whatever loose equipment they could grab. They positioned themselves between the intruders and the command module, a desperate, last-ditch effort to protect their nerve center. Every movement in this weightless environment, required absolute precision. One misstep, one push off a wall that was too hard or too soft, and the consequences could be catastrophic. A collision could send someone spinning into vital equipment, or worse, into an armed enemy. Victor, watching from a hacked camera feed, saw his smooth operation unraveling. He hadn't accounted for the crew's resilience, their intimate knowledge of the station. "They're fighting back," he snarled into his comms. "Nadia, secure navigation. Now, cut them off from any escape routes." Nadia reached the navigation console, her fingers dancing over the controls. But as she tried to lock the system, an alert flashed. "Access denied." Manual override engaged from engineering. In the silence of space, the only sounds were the hum of the station, the frantic taps on keyboards, and the heavy breathing of people fighting for their lives. Martha coordinated her crew through their private, secure channeler, low-tech backup they had trained with for years but never expected to use. "Rajiv, can you isolate their hack? Find the source." "Working on it," Rajiv replied, his hands a blur over his console. "They're good. They're using our own satellite relays against us. But there's a latency, a tiny one. I might be able to exploit it to create a feedback loop." Meanwhile, the physical confrontation escalated. One of Victor's operatives, frustrated by a locked hatch, tried to pry it open with a crowbar. The sea strained. Kenji, from his position, vented a small amount of pressurized nitrogen from a nearby nozzle. The sudden jet sent the operative spinning uncontrollably, his crowbar flying from his grasp and ricocheting around the module. This small victory was a huge morale boost. They could use their knowledge, their environment, as a weapon. Martha saw an opportunity. Amina, Lisa, create a diversion near the cargo bay. Amina and Lisa acknowledged. As the operatives moved to investigate, they passed the open hatch of the main cargo bay. From his terminal, Kenji slammed a virtual button. The two operatives turned, their eyes widening in horror as they realized the trap. The doors sealed with a heavy, final thud, trapping them inside one of the largest and most isolated parts of the station. "They're separating us," he said to Nadia. "Forget the systems. Physical control. Take the command module. Use force." The remaining intruders, now just Victor, Nadia, and one other operative, regrouped. They abandoned subtlety. Their new objective was simple: brute force. They advanced on the command module, their weapons raised. Inside, Martha and her team prepared for the final stand. Rajiv had managed to create the feedback loop. "Get ready," he warned. "Moans, I'm going to overload their comms. It'll be loud, and it will knock out our main comms too for a few minutes." A deafening blast of static and screeching feedback erupted from every speaker on the station. Victor and his team clutched their ears, their comms headsets shorting out with painful squeals. Disoriented and momentarily deafened, their coordinated attack faltered. She launched herself across the module, wrench in hand, not as a weapon to strike, but as a tool to disable. She slammed the wrench into the control panel of the door they were trying to breach, shattering the screen and shorting the mechanism. The door was now permanently locked from the outside. The loud hum of the systems was gone, replaced by the emergency battery backups. The remaining intruders were locked out, their plan in tatters. Martha looked at the faces of her crew, illuminated by the red glow of emergency lights. They were terrified, exhausted, but they were alive. Nay, were ready for whatever came next. Victor realized the resistance was far greater than he had anticipated. "Concentrate on isolating the command module. Disable the override now," he shouted over the comms, a clear note of frustration creeping into his usually calm tone. Elsewhere, Rajiv was trying desperately to restore some form of communication with the ground. "Earth, we have an intruder. Repeat, Intruder aboard the ISS. We need immediate guidance. But his plea was met with static. He knew Earth had only limited real-time control. The inherent transmission delays, combined with the hijackers' sophisticated electronic countermeasures, meant that, for now, the crew was completely on their own. Their survival depended on nothing more than their own ingenuity, their teamwork, and their raw courage. The initial breach had been executed with flawless precision by the hijackers, but now, the true battle for the International Space Station had begun. The zero-gravity environment turned every confrontation into a chaotic, unpredictable ballet. A simple shove could send someone spinning uncontrollably into a bulkhead. A carelessly floating tool could become a lethal projectile, capable of incapacitating an operative or shattering critical equipment with a single impact. Martha, a wrench gripped tightly in her hand, floated purposefully toward the navigation console. Her eyes were fixed on the flickering screens. "Kenji, can you override the propulsion locks manually?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Yes," he replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked. "But if the hijackers interfered while I'm doing it, it could throw the entire station off its orbit." Martha's gaze hardened, her expression grim. "We don't have a choice," she stated flatly. "If they gain control of navigation, they could alter our orbit dangerously, maybe even send us on a collision course with sensitive satellites. We absolutely cannot let that happen." The station, once a shining symbol of international cooperation and scientific advancement, had been transformed into a silent, deadly battlefield. Shadows moved through the modules like ghosts. Tools floated unpredictably through the air, glinting in the dim emergency lighting. Alarms blared sporadically as the hijackers and the crew engaged in a desperate, high-stakes dance of survival. And as the first real confrontation began to unfold, one truth became terrifyingly clear in the unforgiving vacuum of space. There was no mercy, and every single decision could mean the difference between life and death. The station shuddered faintly as the intruders moved with deadly precision, though they were invisible to Earth-based tracking systems. The crew could feel the subtle vibrations through the deck plates and hear the faint, ominous clink of magnetic boots against the metallic walls. In this new, hostile environment, every floating object from scientific tools and laptops to simple medical kits had become a potential hazard. A weapon waiting to be used in this deadly zero-G waltz. Victor's team of hijackers split up, moving with practiced efficiency. Two operatives floated towards the life support module, their movements economical and sure. They expertly bypassed the security panels and began overriding the oxygen circulation controls, a critical first step in their plan. Another operative moved silently into the communications hub, swiftly installing powerful jamming devices and intercepting any and all outgoing signals, cutting the crew off from any outside help. Meanwhile, Nadia, their lead technician, floated towards the navigation module. Her fingers flew across the control panels with astonishing speed as she attempted to seize control of the station's orbital trajectory. Inside the relative safety of the Kibo laboratory module, Martha and Kenji worked furiously, a desperate counterpoint to the intruders' systematic takeover. The crew quickly realized they couldn't stop the hijackers outright. Their only hope was to contain them, to isolate them, to buy precious time and regain at least partial control of the station's most vital systems. "We need to lock down the primary systems," Martha shouted, her voice tense but unwavering. "Kenji, override life support manually. Now. Rajiv, do whatever it takes to get Earth back online. Try the secondary channels. Anything." Kenji's hands moved over the console with a deliberate urgency. He bypassed fried circuits, rewired critical connections, and manually activated the backup air circulation systems. The risk he was taking was enormous. One false move, one crossed wire, could catastrophically depressurize entire modules or overload the power grid. but it was their only option to keep the breathable air flowing. Rajiv, meanwhile, was frantically working on a separate terminal, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen as he cycled through encrypted frequencies, hoping to find a crack in the hijackers' digital blockade. The hijackers were just as focused. Victor watched the station schematics on his tablet, a grim satisfaction on his face. Life support is compromised, one of his operatives reported. Oxygen levels in sectors Alpha and Gamma are dropping. Good, Victor replied, his voice a low murmur. Almost there, she called back. Their firewalls are strong, but I'm finding a way through. But those 5 minutes were exactly what Martha's team was fighting for. A new alarm suddenly blared through the Statia proximity alert. Rajiv yelled, pointing at a new blip on his screen. The object was too small to be a supply ship. It wasn't a known satellite. It's a decoy, she realized. Aloud, it's working. Kenji grunted, wiping Saw there trying to distract us, split our focus. Eat from his eyes. The system is trying to autocorrect our position to avoid a collision that isn't even real. It's putting a massive strain on the gyroscopes. This was the hijackers' strategy. A death by 1,000 cuts. They weren't just using brute force. They were using psychological warfare, creating chaos and confusion to wear the crew down. Victor's voice crackled over the station-wide comms, a chillingly calm announcement. To the crew of the International Space Station. Your resistance is admirable, but futile. We have control of your life support and your communications. Surrender now, and you will not be harmed. Martha grabbed the internal comms microphone. Her voice rang out, firm and defiant. This is Commander Martha Holly. We will not surrender this station. Not now, not ever. Her words were a rallying cry. A spark of hope ignited in the tense atmosphere. The crew knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were not broken. They were astronauts, explorers, scientists. They had trained for years to handle emergencies, and this was the ultimate test. Kenji suddenly let out a triumphant shout. I've got it. I've rerouted primary life support through the X-Vesta module's backup power. They can't shut it down from the US segment anymore. A small victory, but a crucial one. It bought them more time, more air to breathe. Martha clapped him on the shoulder. Good work, Kenji. Now, let's give our guests a surprise of our own. The battle for the ISS was far from over. Every system, every tool, every corner of the station had become a piece on the board. The crew, outnumbered and cut off, had managed to draw a line in the sand. 2. They had lost control of large parts of their home, but they had not lost their will to fight. O sighed. Victor watched the crew's resistance on his monitors. They're smarter than we anticipated, he muttered to his team. Focus on navigation and communications. Force them to negotiate or neutralize them. But do not, under any circumstances, risk combat in the main lab. Their access to life support could ruin everything. The zero-gravity environment made the standoff dangerously unpredictable. Tools that were once harmless now floated freely, turning minor mistakes into potential disasters. A heavy wrench drifted silently past Lisa's head, narrowly missing the fragile visor of her helmet. Across the module, a laptop slammed against a wall, a sudden burst of sparks erupting from its shattered screen. In this weightless ballet of chaos, every object had become a potential weapon, every movement a possible trap. Meanwhile, Rajiv tapped furiously on the secondary communication channel, his fingers flying across the keys. He was trying to bypass the hijackers' sophisticated jamming systems, a desperate attempt to reach the ground. I'm getting through, sort of, he whispered, his voice tight with concentration. Earth can hear us, but the responses are delayed. It seems they're trying to predict our next moves before they advise. Martha, the commander, nodded grimly. Good. We need to buy time. They want control of the station. We'll give them partial access, but we will not let them have full control over navigation or life support. Not now. Not ever. Victor's team, sensing the crew's stubborn defiance, began to escalate their efforts. Nadia, his lead technician, started adjusting the station's thrusters. She initiated a series of small, calculated pulses, designed to subtly alter their orbital positioning without raising alarms on the ground. Her secret objective was to approach a classified military satellite, a ghost in the sky that was meant to be invisible. It was a maneuver so precise that even the slightest error could have catastrophic consequences, sending them into an unrecoverable spin or, worse, on a collision course. Martha's mind raced as she saw the telemetry data flicker. Kenji, we need to counteract those thruster adjustments, and we have to do it manually. Every small change they make will impact our orbit. If they succeed, Earth won't even notice until it's far too late. Kenji nodded, his fingers already a blur over the override circuits. A shower of sparks flickered from the panels as the system strained under the immense pressure of dual control, the hijackers trying to dominate. The crew desperately trying to resist. I've got it. Partially, he grunted. We can stabilize our current orbit for now, but the system is fragile. Any sudden interference from their side could overload it completely. Then we don't give them the chance, Marta said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. The intruders moved through the corridors with a quiet, deadly efficiency. One operative, clad in dark tactical gear, floated into the command module. But their attempt to seize the controls was blocked by emergency manual overrides that Kenji had just activated. Another tried to intercept the oxygen controls, only to find that valves had been ingeniously rerouted to a secondary system they couldn't access. Every attempt to dominate a critical system was met with a clever, unexpected countermeasure from the crew. Lisa and Amina, meanwhile, were working to barricade certain sections of the station. They use floating equipment storage containers, spare parts, even personal belongings, to create temporary barriers. In zero gravity, even minor resistance could be incredibly effective. It could slow down the intruders, buying precious seconds for the crew to regain control of another vital system. Victor watched their progress stall, a frown deepening on his face. Chert, this was supposed to be a swift, surgical takeover. They're using the station itself against us, he hissed into his gums. Contain them. We cannot let them regain full control. Isolate them now. Inside the besieged lab, Martha's eyes darted between flickering panels, assessing every system, every warning light. We've stabilized life support and partially secured navigation, she announced, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. Comms are still compromised, but Earth knows we're in trouble. That's enough for now. Amina's voice trembled slightly as she looked toward the sealed hatch. But they're still in the station with us. Yes, Martha admitted, her hand closing around a floating wrench, its cold metal a comforting weight in her palm. Holiday, and now we need to plan for the next phase. They want this station, but we won't give it to them freely. This has become a game of zero-gravity chess, and every single move counts. The first real battle for the International Space Station had come to a tense standoff. The hijackers had gained partial control, but the crew's ingenuity and quick thinking had prevented a complete catastrophe. Earther, up here in the unforgiving vacuum of space, every second counted, and the margin for error was razor thin. And as the station hung in a delicate balance between its rightful crew and its invaders, one truth became painfully clear. Once a place like this was fully compromised, survival would not just depend on skill or training. It depend on courage, on ingenuity, and on the unbreakable bonds of the people who called this place home. The war for the ISS was far from over. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content just like it, do me a huge favor and smash that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring that little notification bell next to it. Bye for now. See you soon.